Good evening. My name is Ben Goldenberg. I'm a senior at Greeley and a vice president of Enough. On behalf of the students of Enough in the town of Newcastle Holocaust and Human Rights Committee, it is my honor to welcome you to tonight's International Holocaust Remembrance Day program. We are grateful for your participation this evening, as it is more important than ever to remember the Holocaust, to honor the victims, and to understand the relevance and connection between what happened then, only 77 years ago, and our lives today. In the wake of the events in Colleyville, Texas, we are sadly reminded again that hate continues to grow. Our club's goal is to educate our generation about hate so that we can recognize it, stand up to it, and prevent it. We believe that by creating awareness today, we'll be able to create a more accepting and loving tomorrow. Now we will be hearing from County Executive George Latimer.
Hi, I'm George Latimer, Westchester County Executive, and I'm very honored to be with you in a virtual capacity to recognize the town of Newcastle and the Human Rights Commission for putting together this important screening of this documentary film, The Number on Great Grandpa's Arm. This is an important oral history. It's a journey through the past, but it has relevance to the present and to the future. We want to thank Elliot Scions and his class for his great-grandfather Jack Feldman for sharing this story with all of them, a story of the Holocaust and exactly how we can never afford to forget what happened during that period of time. A period of time that ended not long before my birth, but for some people may be fading into the distance, but can never be forgotten. And as the great Santayana said, those who fail to understand and read history are condemned to repeat it. And we want to learn from that experience. We see a resurgence of hate crimes in our society. Some of them are directed in anti-Semitic ways against those who are Jewish. Some of them are directed against people of other different ethnic backgrounds. But whatever the hatred is, it comes from the same root, and that root is an evil root, and it produces bitter fruit. And it's an understanding that there's a separation between us as human beings, that we can take some human beings and treat them as less than human beings and somehow eradicate them from the face of the earth. This was the great horror of the Holocaust. And that number on Grandpa's arm showed that there was a very real time in the not too distant past where people did those things horrifically, and we can never afford to let that happen again. And using the tool of education with the young people that are active here in the Horace Greeley Student Club, the mission of ENOUGH, and that's an acronym that stands for Educate Now on Understanding Genocide and Hate. And it's an appropriate acronym because the word itself, enough, is exactly what we feel. We feel we've seen enough hatred, enough division in this society, and we know that we have to try to educate people. We have to try to get people to understand internally what that mindset of tolerance and acceptance is in order to realize the diversity of the world and not be frightened by it, not be moved negatively by it, but rather seeing it as a source of great strength. And so when young people in this Horace Greeley Student Club step forward and we have such a powerful screening of this film, it's really a tremendous activity, and I'm very happy that I'm a part of it, to welcome it and to thank you for doing it. I'm George Latimer, Westchester County Executive. I hope we enjoy the screening of this movie and learn the lessons from it.
Thank you, County Executive Latimer, for your meaningful remarks and ongoing support. My name is Elliot Scions, and I'm a sophomore at Greeley and the vice president of the Student Club Enough. The documentary you are about to see, The Number on Great Grandpa's Arm, highlights my great-grandfather's story of survival through my conversation with him when I was 10 years old. Since the premiere in 2018, I have had the opportunity to share the film with school districts and communities all around the world. I'm excited to have the opportunity tonight to share this film with my very own community.
Good evening. Thanks so much, Elliot. I am Allie Rosenberg.
And I am Stacy Science.
We are the co-chairs of the Town of Newcastle Holocaust and Human Rights Committee. Following the film, there will be a question and answer session, which you are invited to submit questions in the chat box. The Q&A will be moderated by our Congressman Mondaire Jones, who we are honored to have with us tonight.
Mondaire Jones is a 34-year-old congressman from New York's 17th District, serving Westchester and Rockland counties. He serves on the House Judiciary, Education and Labor, and Ethics Committees, and is the first openly gay Black member of Congress. A product of the East Ramapo Public Schools, Mondaire was raised in Section 8 housing and on food stamps in the village of Spring Valley by a single mother who worked multiple jobs to provide for her family. He later graduated from Stanford University, worked at the Department of Justice during the Obama administration, and graduated from Harvard Law School. He is a co-founder of the nonprofit Rising Leaders, Inc., and has previously served on the NAACP's National Board of Directors and on the board of the New York Civil Liberties Union. Most recently, Mondaire worked as a litigator in the Westchester County Law Department. Mondaire was unanimously elected by his colleagues to be the freshman representative to leadership for the 117th Congress, making him the youngest member of the Democratic House leadership team. Additionally, Jones serves as a deputy whip of the Congressional Progressive Caucus and a co-chair of the LGBTQ Equality Caucus. Mondaire was born and raised in Rockland and resides with us here in Westchester.
And now, the number on great-grandpa's arm.
Good evening, everyone. And thank you to the students at Horace Greeley High School's Club Enough and the Town of Newcastle Holocaust and Human Rights Committee for inviting me to say a few words. What a powerful testament this film is to the bonds that tie us together across generations. Thank you, Elliot, for helping to share your great-grandfather's story. As we mourn his recent passing, I know that you will carry his legacy with you for years to come and help others to do the same through this film. On Thursday, we commemorate International Holocaust Remembrance Day, and we honor the millions of lives lost, including 6 million Jews, in the horrific tragedy that was the Holocaust. 77 years ago on Thursday, thousands were liberated from the Auschwitz concentration camp after enduring years of starvation, abuse, and torture. And while we celebrate their liberation, we also remember the millions of people that did not live to see January 27th, 1945. The millions of people who perished at the hands of anti-Semitism and baseless hatred. Last November, I had the deep privilege of visiting Yad Vashem, the World Holocaust Remembrance Center in Jerusalem, where I saw the millions of shoes worn during that horrific time and read the names of those who perished. The many, many names that we will pass down and remember from generation to generation. That emotional visit for me was a stark reminder of the rich history of the Jewish people, but also of the hatred and the violence that the Jewish people have been subjected to. Of course, during the Holocaust, but also throughout world history. Leaving Yad Vashem, I was especially reminded of the horrors that are possible when non-Jewish people allow creeping anti-Semitism to go unaddressed, and how even in the year 2022, we have so much work ahead of us. Right now, anti-Semitism is on the rise in this country, with thousands of incidents of assault, vandalism, harassment, and worse against Jews occurring every single year in states across the nation. In Texas the other week, a rabbi and 3 members of his congregation were taken hostage at their synagogue for hours. In Muncie, only a few miles from the town of Newcastle, Joseph Newman lost his life after being stabbed at a Hanukkah party. In a suburb of Pittsburgh, 11 Jews were killed during Sabbath services at the Tree of Life Synagogue. In Charlottesville, hundreds of marchers threw Nazi salutes, waved swastika flags, and shouted that Jews will not replace them. In Poway, California, another Jewish life was lost and 3 more injured at a shooting during Passover services. And in Washington, D.C., white nationalists carried Confederate flags and wore Nazi regalia as they violently stormed the Capitol on January 6th of last year. These are just the incidents that we hear about, the ones that are so egregious and horrific that they result in physical injury or loss of life. But the fact is, anti-Semitism also rears its ugly head in ways that don't make it into news headlines. It exists in classrooms when teachers deny the existence of the Holocaust to their students. It exists when people make offensive comparisons between the horrors of the Holocaust and common sense COVID regulations that protect our communities. And it exists when non-Jewish people sit on the sidelines, refusing to stand up for our Jewish brothers and sisters. So let me be clear, no one should have to feel afraid to be Jewish. In their homes, on their jobs, at their schools, and their places of worship, nowhere. As the proud representative of one of the largest Jewish communities in the United States, and one of the most vibrant Jewish communities in the world, here in Westchester and across the river in Rockland County, I am committed to building a world in which no one has that fear. That's why I proudly supported hate crimes legislation that became law last year and joined a letter urging President Biden to utilize the new tools that came from that legislation to combat anti-Semitism. And it's why I called on President Biden to nominate an ambassador to monitor and combat anti-Semitism, which I'm so proud to say he subsequently did. As your representative, you can count on me to continue standing up against anti-Semitism in all of its forms and to stand with the Jewish people always. So thank you again for inviting me to say a few words and to moderate tonight's discussion. Now we'll get to hear from Elliot and the people who brought this incredible story to life. Joining us, we have Amy Schatz, who serves as producer and director of The Number on Great Grandpa's Arm. And she's won numerous awards for her production of documentaries, children's shows, and series. We've got Jeff Shear, who currently serves as an adjunct at NYU's Tisch School of the Arts, and he won an Emmy for his animation in The Number on Great Grandpa's Arm. We, of course, have Elliot Scions, who is a sophomore at Horace Greeley High School and currently serves as vice president of Enough. Elliot has shared The Number on Great Grandpa's Arm with audiences in the United States and Europe in an effort to educate the next generation about the importance of stopping hate. Amy, I want to start with you. You've done extensive work with films for young people on difficult subjects. Would you mind talking to us about the decisions that you made and the goals that you had for this particular film?
Sure. Well, this one was tough. I've worked making children's documentaries, films with kids, for kids, about kids, for many years at HBO. And my executive producer, Sheila Nevins, at the time, had come up with the idea of making a film about the Holocaust for kids. And she was interested in going much younger than one normally thinks about in terms of education about the Holocaust for kids. And I was scared. I thought, this is a terrible story. This is not something that's really an easy story to tell little kids. How you want to assure kids that the world is safe and that they're loved and that things are fair. And this is clearly an example of a moment in history when that was not the case. And so I really struggled with it. And I thought the first place that I usually go to when I'm working on a project is to kids directly. And I thought, what do kids know? What are they curious about? What do they wonder about? And then finding Elliot was really the key to this, because Elliot not only is somebody who had at the time, age 10, a great curiosity about all things to do with history, but he also had repeated conversations with his great grandfather about the story, the family story, and was sort of our guide. He became our storyteller and our a way in for kids. We thought, well, if I could talk with Elliot about this, I could find a softer way or an age-appropriate way to tackle the subject. You know, other questions came up, like how do we show that this really happened, and how do we visualize Jack's story, and do we use archival footage of, you know, emaciated people and of the violence, and that's where Jeff's brilliant animation came in, because we wanted to have the archival quality of it, but also wanted to take it into a realm of storytelling. And Jeff can speak to that when you're ready for that. But you know, for me, I always like to put stuff in the world that has beauty and love. And I think what was unique about this is that Jack and Elliot's relationship was really so loving and so beautiful that it offset the horror. There was the two of them clearly loving each other and loving to be together, and part of Elliot's you know, eliciting the content had to do with his endless interest in his grandfather's life, his great-grandfather's life. I'm sorry about that. And so ultimately it's a film that's got horror, but also love. And I think that's the way that we figured out how to do it. And then the last thing I'll just say about that is that the idea that of the next generation and the next generation carrying on these stories is the hopeful piece of it. And Elliot was an example of taking something and having it live on, so that we, as he says in the film, you know, you need to understand it in order to, oh, Elliot, what do you say? To not forget it, or to make sure it doesn't happen again. And so that generational communication was really important, an important piece of this.
Incredible. Jeff, the animation in this movie is so powerful. And I was hoping you might be willing to speak to us about the technique that you used.
Sure. The technique is called rotoscoping, which is, so I'm drawing from the footage. So I'm looking at the original footage. There was, you know, tons of footage, archival footage. So you're using it as a constant reference. It's an old technique that goes back to the 1920s. But I worked with watercolors and ink. You know, you just to have like more control over it, and also, I think, you know, the choice not to do it digitally gave it the images a kind of organic intensity, and it feels handmade, like you know, like made by a person, just like the story is about a single person. The color theme also, when the Nazis come in, the movie's practically black and white, all the animation, like all the color kind of disappears. And when they're liberated at the end, it comes back. So the animation allowed us to give a kind of emotional color, you know, like a feel, you know, just visually throughout the piece. So a lot of drawings. I think it was probably about 5,000 drawings altogether.
Oh my goodness. It was very powerful. And I think just really unique in the approach that you took, rather than go the route of digital. Elliot, first of all, let me just say that I am so proud of you. I was not doing this when I was in high school, and you should take comfort that your great grandfather is proud of your leadership and how you were changing hearts and minds and making our world a better place. We know that this film premiered in 2018, and that since that time, you've been invited to share this film with classrooms around the world. So what grades have you shared the film with, and why do you think it's important to share this film?
Well, I've shown it with a very vast amount of grades. We've gone from 4th grade all the way up to a college seminar, and even further than that in sessions for teachers learning about how to teach the Holocaust. And, you know, just in general, many adults have learned from it as well as children. And I think it's really important to use the film because it's a very good introductory piece, as well as a really heartfelt and meaningful story that you can take away the basics of the Holocaust and the lessons you need to learn from it as a young child without really feeling the harsh impacts and realities of it, while still accepting that the Holocaust, did happen and that these things can happen in our world, but getting those important takeaways about standing up against hate and how to combat it in our world. Whereas an adult will be able to see the film and take in the story as this really, really personal and meaningful story of the Holocaust, while still getting those same takeaways with the ability to connect it to something more powerful with more prior knowledge. And I especially thank Jeff for that because his animation was just so amazing.
I've been thinking about this for the past few weeks. As we see the growth of anti-Semitism around the world, including in this country, whether it's displayed at the riots on January 6th or the other week at a synagogue in Colleyville, Texas, how can we use this film as a tool to inspire kindness and tolerance? And anyone on the panel can answer this.
Well, I think because this film really can be seen by children, and it's something that kids can truly take in and take away the morals and lessons of the Holocaust from. A lot of those lessons are about hate and about how to stand up for hate, because you can see that so many people sat by and watched. And, if there were more people who would have gotten involved and stood up against Hitler and stood up against the Nazis and helped the Jews, this really couldn't have happened without not just the hate, but the complacency. And, it's really important for children to see that because, obviously they may not be dealing with something on a Holocaust scale, but you can be dealing with an issue that, you're not comparing it to the level of the Holocaust, but you're able to take those takeaways and say, if you see bullying, if you see someone getting picked on or annoyed, you're able to stand up and stand in the way of hate to make sure that it doesn't lead out to something bigger, because it may not lead out to the Holocaust, but it can still get worse and worse and worse until, one individual person is feeling terrible or even more people start to feel this bullying. And so these takeaways can be put to the minor scale, and I think that's really important for children, especially at, an age where they're still learning.
I'm seeing some questions coming in from the audience. One of them is, in light of the current state of events, and since this event is in honor of International Holocaust Remembrance Day, what are the consequences of forgetting the Holocaust? And I want to open that up to anyone on the panel.
Well, the 4 years before President Biden, kind of the worst case scenario for the, what happens when hatred gets institutionalized. This film it's such an intimate warning of the consequences.
Yeah, I agree with Jeff. And, you can see it in some politicians, and you see it allowing it to rise with so many people standing behind someone filled with such hate. And people did try and stand up, and many people stood up and got in the way, but without everyone really doing as much as they can, without, all of Congress being on board to have some sort of impeachment, or even just the cabinet of someone of that scale trying to push them in the right direction and away from such hate, without all of the people of America, the people of certain country or the world standing up and trying to do something, nothing really can get done. And so it's so important to try and educate as many people as possible, because the more people there are, the more influence there is against hate, and the more we truly can do about it.
Very, very well said. Amy, this question is for you. This film is beautifully done. It's very intimate, and I think that makes the story so real. This is from someone in the audience. How do you get across the message of 6 million people to the folks you were introducing this to? How do you express the magnitude?
Well, that's a really good question. I think when we began, one of the things that I was thinking of is that we would do a series of conversations. So it wouldn't just be this one conversation. And we filmed several of them, which live on the website. And then it became clear that this quiet, intimate film had the capacity to make you feel the loss that Jack felt, the loss in this quiet little moment when he says he never saw his parents again and Elliot holds his fingers. Like that heartbreak of that loss is so quiet and nonverbal. It's just like a moment of just you think about that. And if you're a little child watching, what's the worst thing in the world is not being able to see your parents again. So instead of going wide and big, we went quiet and small and decided that, you know, the conversation lasted for, the film is 18 minutes. It's just how it happened to end up. We could have made a longer film. We could have done many things, but it just had this organic quality to it. And it felt like a perfect, quiet moment of reflection. And I think there is room for all kinds of films about the Holocaust. You know, I think there are films that show the magnitude, the number of people who were murdered. But this was a particular, you know, little poem of a film. I mean, I think through Jeff's animation, I mean, one of the things that we tried to do was use some of the footage of the, you know, the death marches and actual photographs from the time to show that this was a real event and this really happened to millions of people. But we wanted to connect it to Jack's story and keep it in his, keep it personal to him and not extrapolate out. We wanted to kind of keep it, everything we showed and all the footage and all the animation we include was in the service of Jack's story. Right, Jeff? Would you say that's true?
Absolutely. You know, and by making it about one person instead of 6 million, it becomes, you know, 6 million is just a staggering number. But one person is something that you can immediately identify with, and that it's this child, you know, orphaned in this insane storm. Just makes it intimate and moving and like specific and also undeniable. I mean, there's an honesty and a veracity to his story that is so compelling. Like, you know, I mean, there are people who are denying the Holocaust. Let them deny it after this film. I don't think it's possible.
Amy described the film as a poem. And before she got to it, I was thinking to myself, that poetry really comes across in the animation. So Jeff, how did you choose the images that you did choose that were animated? Because you talked about
I had a really great director. So, you know, picking the images, it was a combination of, you know, we wanted the continuity of the story to support it, like in the broader historical context, and also to, you know, add color to the life and the world that he was in. But also, you know, the animation allowed us to do really interesting things. Like there's a technique where, like, there'll be a scene where, for example, the shot of the women being lined up in the street with their holding up their arms, being marched away by the Nazis. By painting on one woman first, then the next woman, then the next woman, then the next woman, it starts out, we're sort of revealing a scene, like we're extending the horror of this one photograph in a cinematic way by making it, you know, like this reveal. So we can control how people look at the photographs because the photographs are so dense. You know, so we can sort of like not like forcing someone to look at them a certain way, but to like reveal the truths that are layered into them. There's so much photography of the Holocaust, and so many of these photographs, when you look at them for a long time, you just discover new horrible things in them. Like in the corners of frames, you know, that's not a pile of rags, there's a body over there. Like, anyway, so we were able to kind of, extract or distill the essence of these photographs into a digestible, understandable, and hopefully, you know, creates the right feeling as elements of support of the story.
Elliot, someone in the audience asked, was Jack ever able to connect with other relatives?
Well, yes, he was never able to reconnect with his parents, as he said, but after the war, he went back to his hometown of Sosnowiec, and there he found no one. But in a nearby town known as Skarzysko, he did have some family, and upon returning there, he was able to find a couple of his cousins. With them, he moved to Germany in the displaced persons camp and married his wife. And then one of their cousins went to Canada, and she went to America, where he would open the fish market.
This is actually a question that I had that Rochelle asked in the chat. Is 18 in minutes significant to 18 in Hebrew, meaning life? Is that a question for you, Amy?
I think it's just magic, you know, it just happened that way. You know, we had the flexibility to make the film as long as it needed to be. And it turned out to be this meaningful 18-minute film. So 18 wasn't, after the fact, we realized it's 18 minutes.
Well, how fortuitous.
Right, isn't that a nice symbol?
Well, look, I think that's our final question. I want to thank all of the panelists for sharing their insights on how this movie came to be and the importance of keeping these stories and memories alive for generations to come. Now I'm going to hand things over to my friend, Jack.
Thank you, Congressman Jones, and all of the panelists for a powerful discussion tonight in commemoration of International Holocaust Remembrance Day. My name is Jack Rosenberg, and I'm one of the co-presidents of Enough. This event helps Enough fulfill its mission to educate our community, to recognize the dangers of hate, and to create a more accepting community. We thank you for your support and participation. Now I would like to introduce our town supervisor, Lisa Katz, who will give closing remarks.
Thank you, Jack. And thank you to Congressman Jones, Amy Schatz, Jeff Scher, Elliot Scions, the members of Enough, and the Town of Newcastle Holocaust and Human Rights Committee for this incredibly moving event in honor of this Thursday's International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And a special and heartfelt thank you to the memory of Jack Feldman. We are blessed to be able to hear his story tonight. More than 7 decades after the end of the Holocaust, not only are memories of the Holocaust fading, but anti-Semitism and hatred against the Jewish people are on the rise, as we heard tonight. It was horrifying to recently hear the man who entered a synagogue in Colleyville, Texas, hoping to free a terrorist from prison, saying, "I know President Biden will do things for the Jews, and America only cares about Jewish lives." But it was possibly even worse to hear an FBI agent say that the crime was not related to the Jewish community. Yes, we can all see and rally against the physical image of a Hasidic man being beaten in the street. But as in the years before World War II, we are again in danger of failing to see systemic and indoctrinated moral hatred against Israel and the Jewish people as a whole. To paraphrase Brett Stevens in his article in the New York Times this Sunday, how can it be that in this era of heightened sensitivity to every kind of hatred, bias, and stereotype, both conscious and unconscious. There's so much outright denying when it comes to calling out bias aimed at Jews. So now, more than ever, it's incumbent upon all of us, Jewish and non-Jewish alike, to speak out against those who perpetuate the belief that the Jewish people are different, that Jews are somehow more powerful and more dangerous to society. On this International Holocaust Remembrance Day, we must call out anti-Semitism and bigotry in all its forms, make sure to educate our children, and vow never to forget. Thank you for joining us tonight.